How are you?
I will call to order the March 9th, 2009 meeting of the Anchorage Planning and Zoning Commission. Would the secretary call the roll, please?
Isham. Here. Phelps. Stay here. Yoshimura. Here. Frederick. Weddleton. Keys. Here. Wang.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Earnhardt.
He is excused. We have a quorum. Okay, the next item on our agenda are disclosures. Mr. Isham.
Yeah. Ms. Pease, do you have anything to disclose this evening?
I do not.
Hey, Ms. Yoshimura. No. Ms. Jones?
No.
Mr. Phelps?
No.
Mr. Wang?
No.
And I have none.
All right. We have no items on the consent agenda, so we move forward to item E, unfinished business, which is case number 2008-134. This was the master plan review for Girdwood South Town Site, And the reconsideration of what was for Phase 1 only. It turns out we don't have a quorum for that matter, in that neither Mr. Phelps nor Mr. Wang, I believe, were at that hearing, and I don't believe either one of them have listened to the tapes yet. So
That's correct.
we need to, and Ms. Yoshimura wasn't at that hearing either, so that only leaves 3 of us that were.
Madam Chair.
So we need to postpone.
Yeah, Madam Chair, move to postpone item E1, 2008-134. I would assume until the next scheduled
I
meeting.
think staff is going to offer us some guidance with regard to a date.
Yeah, through the chair, April 6th would be your next meeting, and that we would also think that would be appropriate to take up this matter at that time.
April 6th.
Okay, I'm looking for a second in my magic window. Thank you, Mr. Wang. Is there any objection? Okay, hearing none. That is postponed again until April 6th. And can we get those tapes to the folks that need to, can we get the tapes to the folks that need to listen to them fairly soon?
Yes, we'll make those next day or so and get those over to you.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Question for staff. Is there any papers that's going to go along with this thing? Are you going to give us any kind of a packet or anything like that?
Yes, we will submit our recommendation along with those tapes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And it would be good to submit the tapes to the paper part to the rest of us, even though we participated in the meeting, so we know what your revised recommendation is.
We will do that, and tapes will go to Commissioners Phelps, Yoshimura, and Wang.
Correct. And then on anything else that comes up where people, were absent and we need to deal with it and we may not have a quorum, we're going to have to get tapes to people, as you and I discussed. Okay. The next item on our agenda is under public hearings, and the first item is case number G1, and it is a plan amendment for the UMed district, and it's a plan amendment to the framework master plan to change the development designation for the area generally located north of 40th Avenue between Laurel and Folker Streets from development reserve to redevelopment and development priority. Could we have the staff presentation, please?
Madam Chairman, also, in addition, I think you'll see in your packet there were some sort of housekeeping amendments to some of the streets, and I'll go through those also.
Okay.
The UBED plan was first a partnership between the municipality, Anchorage Mental Health Trust, Providence, Alaska Medical Center, and the University of Alaska. They started in 1998, and in 2003, the UMed plan was adopted by the Assembly as an element of the Anchorage 2020. Under 2105-040, the Planning and Zoning Commission reviews any proposed modification to the comprehensive plan before the Assembly may act on a proposed amendment. And to account for possible changes, a process was established for plan review and reevaluation. The plan may be reviewed when recent and proposed land use decisions and adopted studies and plans make changes affecting the plan. The purpose of the plan was to provide a policy framework to guide decisions about land use, access to accommodate the growth needs of the university, medical and institutional areas. It was not intended to be restrictive and lock up lands in perpetuity, but it was intended for a sequential growth. The amendments, there are 5 of them, and I'll just go through them. The first one, I'll go ahead and actually take the streets first. The UMed plan, and you can see it on the map in your packet or with the UMed plan that I handed out tonight, that there is, I believe that's on page 14, which shows that there were some original proposals for street connections, but the Assembly, when they adopted it, they did make the condition that there be a circulation and traffic analysis that was done before those streets actually were adopted and put into effect. Those plans are the Tudor Road Corridor Study, and as part of that study is the Tudor Area Traffic Calming Study. Those were adopted by the Assembly, and they were reviewed, of course, before the Planning and Zoning Commission with their recommendations. 40th Avenue and Wright Streets, 40th Avenue and Piper Streets were proposed to be put onto the official streets and highway plan as collector ones, and that has happened. And additionally, the 40th Avenue, the Commission has seen that before last year when they approved the road plans for that particular roadway to go through. Originally in the UMED plan, between just there south of 40th, between Piper Street and Folker, there was a segment that was not going to be put through, and with the studies, it was determined that that connection was needed to be made. At this point, the 40th Avenue has gone through several stages. It's gone through public review, and it's proposed to be constructed, I believe, starting this year and finishing up next year. So there will be a connection between Lake Otis and Dale Street, with 40th Avenue going all the way through. So that's one amendment that to show that connection being made. Another amendment is for Wright Street, which was originally proposed to connect up to Providence. The study indicated that, and also there was a petition from the public that they did not want it to be extended all the way to Providence, so it extends to 40th Avenue. Piper Street is also being proposed as an amendment in that it was proposed to make a straight shot from 40th up to Providence, and that street, if any of you have been on it, you know that it sort of takes a curve and still does connect up to Providence. The other street is Florina Street, which is located about a block west of Elmore, and it dead ends sort of at some multiple family housing just south of the UAA student housing. And that was originally planned to go through, and that now is just going to dead end at that point, along with there being a trail now that makes a connection in there for pedestrian access. The other change is the designation for the area that is located between Laurel and Folker Streets, the area that has been known as the Hill and designated as a feature to be not preserved, but to try to preserve some feature of the Hill. With the street, with 40th Avenue being put through, there's also a map in your packet that shows how much of that hill will need to be taken out. And let me see, that's on page 23. And I believe you can see from that the hill will be significantly altered by the time that road project is put in. Originally, when in that area, because of the topography, there was going to be two tall walls on either side at that point. And during the 65 to 95% change was made so that on the north side of 40th Avenue at that point, the wall will not be there, and it will steep into the hillside. The original intent was that there was going to be on that site, I believe there was like a respite that was proposed at one point, and it was going to be built into the hill with the vegetation around it. That particular development went to a different site, and at this point, because of the 40th Avenue and how much area it will need to be taking out of the hill, we're recommending the change be made from development reserve to development priority. Both of those allowed development, and the designations, again, if you look on page 7 of the existing UMed plan, you can see that the designations on there are different than the usual UMed plan type or the usual land use plan designations, and they allowed for growth within the UMed area. If you look on page it would be the second map. I'm sorry, we don't seem to have those pages numbered. It would be approximately page 9 or 10. It's what it is the aerial of the hill itself there. So our recommendation is that the designation be changed to reflect future development of that area. As noted on the last page, you can find it. The intensity of development in the UMed district and the need for improved access and circulation in the area dictated the need for road connections, which ultimately have come into conflict with that hill. So our recommendation is that the administration approve the following amendments found on page 4 and 5. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions of staff at this time? Ms. Pease?
Yes, Madam Chair. Staff referred to pages numbered in our packet, including, I think, page number 23, and my packet's not numbered. There are the 6 attachments. So the one in particular that I was interested in was I think it was a drawing showing how the street would be connected, 40th Avenue would be connected, and how much of the hill and the tract would be affected. So without using page numbers, could you refer to where I might see that?
Yes, actually, looking for the back pages is going to be page 26, and this is on page 23. So if you come back.
Yeah, I saw that somewhere.
Madam, through the chair, Commissioner Pease, the diagram is in attachment 5, and the cover page for that is 40th Avenue slope.
Thank you. What I was looking for is how much of the adjoining tract this impacts. Is there some place where it references in the staff packet that there would be 4.5 acres left of tracts, whatever it is. But how big is that tract, and how
The tract is approximately 5.5 acres, and so it will affect about an acre. On page 4 of your packet, the first paragraph there, it states, however, the width of the public use easement beyond the 60-foot road reserve. There's a 60-foot road reserve that was in place with a plat that was recorded in 2004, and in addition to that, there will be the 40th Avenue road improvements will remove a significant portion of the hill, distributing approximately 135 feet from the north boundary of the south-foot reserve. So we're looking at approximately 195 feet, including the road reserve.
And if I could finish up on that question, what happens then when 40th Avenue gets down to the building, which is on Laurel and 40th?
It gets down, I'm sorry, could you?
Is the building on Laurel and 40th going to be impacted by this hill removal back 135 feet from the existing right-of-way?
No. In fact, I don't know exactly where the access for that tract will end up being. It depends on the development, but no, that will not affect Laurel Street. The grade there, when it's done, will be approximately 6% in that area.
That's all for now.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps?
I guess the question I have has to do with the two amendments. I recognize there's 5, but 3 are deletions, and from my point of view, I don't really get too concerned about deletions. It's the additions I'm more concerned about. When I look at what is established as 40th Avenue, which would be in addition to this plan, what I am reviewing here indicates that it's already gone through extensive public review, including platting, correct? It was a replat.
Yeah, this is almost a housekeeping matter.
That was my interpretation, is that it's already gone through extensive review. This is a policy decision, but a lot of decisions have already been made on 40th Avenue.
That's correct.
Okay. And the reason that we want to change it to development priority is, again?
There's two. This particular plan has it sort of has a sequential growth type of element to it, and the sorry, I can't see both of them allow actually for development. The development preserve actually indicated that there was to be. It essentially sort of left the idea that a portion of the hill and the trees would be preserved, and or at least taken into consideration with development. But because of what the amount of space that the road has taken up with 40th going through there, it sort of changes that, and so we're changing it to the next designation, which still allows for development, and at the same time gives some ability to still save some of the trees, or at some point if that's in the approved plans and the development plans, which you will also be reviewing in the future.
I guess that was my question. The way that I have interpreted this is that because of the development of 40th, you're left with a much smaller area than you had originally anticipated. And because of that, you need to have the space as a higher priority now because it's of greater importance because of the access.
That's correct.
So I guess the concern would be whether or not there would be a review process for any development in that area, because the intent of the development reserve was to preserve certain scenic features, and I presume that there would still be a continuation to some degree of that intent. Would you pick that up in a review process of some sort, like public facility site plan or something?
Yes, with the site plan. The PLI requires a site plan approval, as long as if there was if there's going to be a natural resource extraction without development plans, it would require conditional use, but with development plans, it does require a site plan review.
So I'm not sure I'm clear about the last answer. Is there going to be, or would there be a site plan review of an improvement in this area if it was not a conditional use requirement? I understand.
Yes, it would.
Yes, okay.
I'm sorry for being confusing, but yes, it would
Under
require
public
that.
facility site plan?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Isham.
Yes. Ms. Contreras, as I understand it, you indicated that prior to a redesign, they were basically planning on cutting a slot for 40th Avenue, and then on a review, they went to this 3-to-1 slope.
Originally, there was going to be 2 walls, one on either side, and because of the height of the walls and the cost, they looked at other options. And so now on the north side, instead of having a very tall wall, they're steeping back the slope.
Okay, and you indicated there was it'll use about an acre out of this 5.5 acres?
That's approximately correct.
Okay. And you realize that it's identified on the original plan as a stand of 50 to 100-year-old trees. That hill is designated on the original plan, so it must be kind of important for having 50 to 100-year-old trees.
There's actually 2 areas that had trees, and I don't know whether those 50 to the 100 is right on that hill or on another portion of it. I think from what I could tell in the field, it does appear that the whole hill does have trees on it.
Mm-hmm. You can see that from the picture.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Monsieur Shimura. Oh, excuse me, Ms. Yoshimura, Mr. Nelson was in the queue first. I need to acknowledge him. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to maybe clarify or supplement what Ms. Contreras indicated. When the plan was being developed, there was interest on this parcel, this tract of land, which is basically it's a natural feature in the area that many people had a desire to retain, which is basically this hill. And it's very wooded, and the classification that was developed when the plan was made was development reserve, which basically says that it can be developed, but the development would be basically tucked into the site without significant disturbance to the natural features on the area. This was based on the presumption that 40th would not go through between Foker and Laurel, so that the hill would actually be retained. There are a number of things that have happened subsequent to when this plan was adopted. The most significant one probably being that the two-road corridor study and other traffic analyses that were done indicated that they really needed to extend 40th Avenue all the way through to Lake Otis. And part of that was because they could no longer extend Wright Street to Providence, and because of some of the changes in land use and property acquisitions that occurred. In particular, API was originally going to be relocated to a different location away from the UMed area, but instead they ended up moving slightly to the west of their old location. Providence bought their old location and retained the building rather than removing the building and remodeling and using it. So because of the change in the traffic pattern and because of the study done by the two-road corridor study, it was determined that 40th Avenue really needed to be extended all the way through as a collector road to Lake Otis. When they did the design study for 40th Avenue, they looked at a number of design alternatives. And ultimately, and as Joanne mentioned, one of the alternatives they looked at was putting retaining walls on both sides of the road as they crossed through the hill between Foker and Laurel. The cost, however, of that was over $2 million more than if they basically put only retaining wall on the south side and had a 3-to-1 slope on the north side. The end result, however, is that with the approved design for 40th Avenue going through that area, it significantly altered the accessibility and usability of the tract of land. And it basically indicated that in order to utilize it, you are going to have to, it's already being disturbed, you're going to have to disturb it even more in order to access it. So when we looked at the land use classifications in the UMed plan, it was felt that really the proper designation was development priority rather than development reserve, because it's impractical at this point to actually preserve the hill and make use of it and still have adequate access in light of the extension of 40th Avenue through that area.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Ms. Yoshimura, thank you for being patient.
Through the chair. Well, I'm new to this plan, and so I just have a couple of background questions, I guess. Who owns the stand of trees? Who owns that property?
The Mental Health Trust.
The Mental Health Trust. Okay. So it says on the plat that the municipality shall be responsible for the construction of this roadway. You know, I'm a private developer. How does that happen? I mean, how does 40th Street get constructed by the municipality as opposed to the property owners?
It's not a local street. It's a Class 1 collector. And the municipality assumes responsibility for collector and arterial roadways.
Really? Okay. So my other question would be on the assembly memorandum, where it says the cost for the project has been shared by the municipality, the University of Alaska, Providence, and the Alaska Mental Health Trust property. Have any of those entities, other than the municipality of Anchorage, paid for any of the improvements in this UMed district? For roads,
The Providence Hospital did pay a portion of the cost for Piper Street and the intersection with Tudor.
a portion?
Yes.
Can you be more specific, please, through the chair?
I could be definitive, I would give you the dollar amount, but I don't think I recall what the exact dollar amount was. It was a significant number, but I couldn't tell you without checking.
Could you tell me a percentage?
No, because I don't know what that full cost ultimately was for Piper.
All right. And then my final question or comment has to do with the comment under amendment process where it says the plan may be reviewed when recent and proposed land use decisions and adopted studies and plans make changes affecting the plan. So I know that there's been a considerable debate within the municipality and in the public sector and private sector about whether or not these comprehensive plans take precedence over other land use decisions. And I am assuming from this statement that the answer is no, that these comprehensive plans are advisory only and do not supersede other land use regulations. Would that be a correct assumption?
No. The comprehensive plan is the basis for other land use regulations. Now, the reason that we're making this amendment is because the comprehensive plan, we have standards for review of conditional uses, for instance. One of the standards for approval of a conditional use is it has to be consistent with adopted plans and policies. There's a good possibility that on the tract of land, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's C2, the tract of land, a conditional use comes in, application for a conditional use on tract C2 comes in. We have to make a determination, the Planning Commission has to make a determination that proposed use and development is consistent with adopted plans and policies. If we have a land use classification that makes it inconsistent, it's very difficult to be able to approve that. What we're wanting to do with this amendment is to basically, in light of the changed circumstances that have occurred since this plan was adopted, there's a valid reason for modifying this plan to change the land use classification to a more appropriate one to allow for consideration development on tract C2. That's what's driving this.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mr. Isham.
A question back to the development reserve versus development priority. Is there anything to prohibit 40th Avenue from going through if we would still retain the development reserve designation?
Okay. No, the 4th Avenue would still go through.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further questions before I open the public hearing?
Yes.
Ms. Yoshimura.
Well, I guess just following up on what Mr. Isham asked, then what is the reason for the change in classification along with the road, the change in the road?
It's sort of as Tom was pointing out that with the change, the original intent with the designation that we put on there originally, which was the I believe it's the reserve. The intent was that we were looking at that tract as not having the road go through, and that there would be the ability to actually save more of the trees and develop into the site. With the changes that were made in putting 40th through, which went through the two transportation studies as well as the plat review process. Now the site, because there is a significant amount of hill being taken away, the development of the site will actually change as from how it could have developed previously. The new designation gives more flexibility.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see anyone else in the queue, so Mr. Phelps.
I just want to go back to the last comment that there is a substantive effect in this change of classification because of what Mr. Nelson was saying. My understanding is that on the development priority, that indicates an intention on the part of municipality, I suppose, or an entity in that district to have some type of development there. And so if a conditional use were to be received affecting that particular parcel, it would meet the requirements of the comprehensive plan because it's an element of it. If, however, a conditional use application was received for a development reserve, you would have a potential inconsistency. That's my understanding of the situation.
Basically, that's correct. It's more than just trees. The development reserve was put in place when this plan was developed to preserve the hill. It's a natural feature. That was the intent. Preserve the hill and vegetation associated with the hill. When 40th Avenue goes through, it does a couple of things. One, takes away almost a quarter of the hill, if not more. But also, it takes away what at that time was considered to be access to the hill. Now you have a remaining segment or remnant of the hill left with more challenging access to it, particularly from 40th Avenue. So the intent is basically to acknowledge that it's going to be very difficult to preserve and be able to utilize a remnant of the hill that remains after 40th Avenue is built, and instead acknowledge that it's a development site, but that the features for which it was intended to be protected are no longer really viable to be protected because of its disturbance as a result of building 40th Avenue. And so we're changing the classification to better represent the current circumstances that are in place.
Okay. All right, I don't see anyone. Well,
I have.
No, you haven't. It didn't show up. Is yours not working?
Okay, now I withdrew, and you didn't see any change, and now
No, I don't see any change, but I will recognize you, Ms. Dees.
Oh, am I not?
No, you still didn't show up.
Public hearing? Oh,
There you are.
still learning. Through the chair, I wanted to ask staff if the Tudor Road traffic calming study gave enough focus to 40th Avenue and Wright Street to meet the requirement of AO 2003-129 in attachment 3, which said that there would be a traffic study with public participation that would specifically address Wright Street and 40th Avenue and intra-district circulation options. Did the traffic Tudor Road study and the Tudor Road traffic calming study give sufficient attention? Okay.
Yes, they did, and they were adopted by the Assembly.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, there's no one left in the queue, so I will go ahead and open the public hearing. If there's someone speaking on behalf of a petitioner, they're allowed 10 minutes and can reserve some of their time for rebuttal. People speaking on behalf of a group can speak for 5 minutes, and individuals are allowed 3 minutes. So whoever would like to testify, come forward. And please state your name for the record.
My name is Tim Spurnack, and I represent the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority through their Trust Land Office. We support the amendment. Lot C2, Tract C2, is a portion of a 15-acre tract that was subdivided a few years ago into a 5.5-acre tract and a 9-acre tract where current API is situated. The Trust Authority has 5 different properties in this area. Three is on B3, one is vacant, 7.5-acre parcel. We have an R1 parcel at Piper and Providence Drive, and this C2 piece of property, which was 5.5 acres, will be reduced to 4.5 acres. Essentially, there's 47,000 square feet of road that will take 47,000 square feet of the property. We support the amendment. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Spurnack? By the way, welcome back
Thank you.
Mr. Isham.
Mr. Spurnack, all you really want is 40th Avenue, right? You want that access through there?
Well, it's the municipality's decision to build that. Does it enhance the value of our property? It will, yes.
Okay, so you need that road to support the development of your other properties in that area, I would assume.
No, actually, we have 3 impacts from 40th Avenue. Where the new OPA building is, there'll be an 18,000 square foot take for public use easement there. That building just to the east of it is another piece of property that we lease to a private developer on a long-term ground lease. That'll take 16,000 square feet, and then C2, they'll be taking a 47,000 square feet. We still have access to C2 from 2 other areas. One is through the campus of API and McLaughlin Youth Center, and the other one is from, and I don't remember the name of the street, but it's the Securitas Street that goes in back of the new OPA building. So that we're not landlocked. That property is not landlocked without 40th Avenue being constructed.
Well, what I guess what I'm getting at is I'm looking at these trees and this hill and this landmark, and I'm saying, why in the world are we tearing this hill up? Why don't we build it like they initially thought by basically putting a slot through the mountain and don't disturb near as much of the land there to the north, I guess. And I see the need for the street, but I just don't see the need for taking a whole acre to do it.
That acre is actually straight cut through that area. What you see in the section view showing the 3-to-1 slope going back, that's from the curb line going back from the edge of the public use easement going back to the 3-to-1 slope. So that 47,000 square feet would be going away, whether it's a slot with retaining walls or any other way, it just wouldn't be sloped back. We supported the sloping versus a retaining wall. The retaining wall would be taller than the one at Lake Willis and Tudor, or I think it's St. Mary's or
St. Mary's Episcopal Church.
Church would be significantly taller, and that would be a quarter canyon through that area. We didn't support that. There are some engineering questions on what we could do with that property in back of that wall from slope failure if anything was to be built on that. So there were good reasons to do a slope instead of doing a retaining wall. PM&E supported that as well. We had a number of meetings with Dow engineers on the cost savings. I think that was a $2.7 million retaining wall. The project was not funded sufficiently to support that. And the lowest cost alternative and for both the city and for us was to permit this slope going back from the north side of the property line, the public use easement.
Okay, thank you.
Well, okay, we have some more questions here. Ms. Pease.
Yes, what is the value of 47,000 square feet in the UMed district, though, the value of the property that will become roadway?
It's being appraised right now by, I think it's Pacific Advisors. We don't know the value of the property. There's takings all the way along from Lake Otis to Piper Street on both sides of the center line of the street, and they are appraising those now, and then we'll have to take those properties through a public use easement. So I couldn't tell you the exact land value of that.
Through the chair, perhaps staff might be able to follow up on that. I guess my question is, in describing the cost of $2 million or $2.7 million to put in a retaining wall, has that been balanced or weighed against the cost of the extra right-of-way, given that this is UMed district? So are we talking about, is that a net figure, or is that just the cost of the wall?
My understanding, that was the cost based on the engineering design of putting a retaining wall on the north side between Laurel and Folker Street. The $2.7 million was the estimated cost for that second retaining wall.
So we don't really know how much, if any, we're saving by buying the properties instead of building a wall and using less property.
Through the chair, if I may respond to Ms. Pease on that.
You may.
We're not losing any more property. No additional square footage is being taken from Lot C2. you would be putting retaining walls and cutting straight down, and what we're doing now is starting here and sloping back. So this is not an additional public use easement. You have to think of it as a box, and then the base of the box it slopes back 3-to-1 on the north side, and there's a retaining wall on the south side.
So
There's no additional square footage being taken that the city's paying for.
Right. I mean, we still have to buy the right-of-way. Regardless of whether there's a retaining wall or not, you still have to buy the bulk of the land acquisition is for the right-of-way.
So you're saying you would buy 47,000 square feet going 135 feet into tract C2?
No.
Even if you put in a wall?
No. We're buying basically 60 feet of right-of-way
Okay.
through that length of distance. There's going to be a slope easement outside that 60 feet of right-of-way.
And you won't be buying that property?
There'll be a value, but the vast portion of the acquisition cost is for the 60. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but the vast portion of the cost is for the actual 60-foot right-of-way to the road.
That's correct.
Okay, so just to try to pull it together, we still don't know, though, what the comparative cost would be if it were built with a wall versus if it were built with the slope.
We do. That's what we do. It's $2.7 million more with the retaining wall.
Yeah.
But as I understand, this is already part of adopted plans, isn't it, Mr. Nelson?
Yes, and the design for this, for 40th Avenue has been through.
So it isn't an issue if the road's going to be built there.
Right.
The issue is that that this plan needs to be conformed to the already approved transportation plans and the other transportation studies that have recommended this.
That's correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that's really clear with regard to what it costs, that there are other studies and such that evaluate that too, but the road's going to be built.
Right. That's correct. I mean, there has been a significant vetting of whether or not 40th Avenue should be extended through. That decision was made all the way through the Assembly and the Tudor Road Corridor Study. There's subsequently been engineering design for the extension of 40th Avenue. That's gone through public facility site plan review as well. That's been approved. There's been funding raised to build this road. That's been done. They plan to get underway this year. What we're trying to do is to basically amend the UMED plan to do one, show the changes that have occurred in the road system in the area since this plan was adopted, and secondly, make a change in the land use classification for tract C2. Again, because of the changed circumstances that have occurred since the assumptions were made regarding tract C2, or that area, the hill, basically, when the plan was adopted.
Okay. I've got, I'm going to let you finish your thought, and then I'm going to add something before I acknowledge Mr. Phelps, Ms. Yoshimura, and Mr. Isham, because there's a piece here that hasn't been mentioned by anybody yet tonight that I just want to see if I'm understanding correct about this, and it might help clarify a lot of things.
Yeah, the reason I was asking about the design is the design helps to support or not support the rezoning or the change in status from development reserve to development priority. So if what I'm hearing is that the design has been decided, it wasn't clear to me because page 4 says that the between the 65% and 95% design completion stage, the north wall concept was abandoned. So I gather I should conclude that the slope is the design method that's it's all but adopted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, if folks will indulge me just for a second. I'm not the brightest light bulb about this, but looking back over the last few years and some of the studies that have gone on in this area, and I'm glad to see that Ms. Mary Ellen Tuttle is in the back of the room because she can swiftly correct me if I'm wrong. But it seems to me when a lot of the decisions were being made for a lot of the work that was being done around all the additions to Providence Hospital and Piper Street and the improvements to Piper Street and that road going through and the signalization, there was a lot of concern in the community about through traffic. And a lot of those concerns were particularly on 42nd Avenue. People on 42nd Avenue, which is highly residential, didn't want a lot of increased traffic coming through. And 40th Avenue is an alternative to that because a lot of the medical facilities and that are in the area, 40th Avenue is a clear or straight shot, and it's much more direct, and you don't have to go through 42nd Avenue to get over to Piper Street. People avoid Tudor Road like the plague, and they're going to take the back route, and the back route is to go Piper to 42nd and go past all of those residents. There's no sidewalks. Little kids are walking in the streets, and I think they've been talking about 40th Avenue for a long time, but Mr. Nelson can correct me.
No need to. You've stated it. Basically, part of the impact of development in this area is that 42nd Avenue is being used as an access route. And 42nd Avenue is a local residential street. 40th Avenue really is needed in order to basically move traffic in and out of the area without impacting that neighborhood.
And to get that traffic off of 42nd.
Correct.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may, I also neglected to say that I went to both the Tudor Community Council and the University Area Community Council. The University Area Community Council, that was just last week, they voted to approve a resolution in support of this amendment.
Okay. Mr. Phelps, thank you for your patience.
Maybe I want to just emphasize this again, but we're not making a decision on the design of a street here. We're making a decision on an amendment of the plan.
Correct.
And the issue about, the effect of the highway or road upon the site is one that may be unfortunate, but we will have the opportunity of looking at that impact and determining whether it's appropriate or not when the public facility site plan does come back to us. And so we do have that capability. That opportunity is not going to be lost to us. I guess I'm turning to staff to say that is correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
Okay. The other question I had is this land mental health trust land?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I should probably indicate I work for the Alaska Department of Natural Resources, and I do get involved in mental health trust land issues. I'm not particularly involved in this one, but I do get involved in a variety of those issues.
Thank you for your disclosure. Ms. Yoshimura.
Okay, well, I have just a couple of more questions. So the 60-foot right-of-way land belongs to the Mental Health Trust Authority? Is
That's
that
correct.
That's correct. Okay. So the municipality is going to buy that 47,000 square feet from the Mental Health Trust Authority and build the road. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Mr. Yoshimura, that's correct, and a number of other parcels along 40th Avenue.
I am assuming that some of that land is, or most of that land is zoned high-density residential. Would that be a correct assumption?
Through the chair, Mr. Yoshimura, that's not correct.
Okay, so
The two parcels that we have land lease to developers, the OPA building and the next building to the east, those are B3.
okay,
This one is, the C2 is PLI.
okay,
And to clarify perhaps for Ms. Pease, this is not a rezoning, it's an overlay plan amendment, so there's no change of the land use. The other properties that will lose some land will be Providence and API. Slight slivers of their properties as well, all the way to Piper Street from Lake Otis.
so the cost of this road is, like Ms. Pease suggested, the cost of the road itself plus the acquisition.
Correct, as it always is.
I wish someone would build a road for my properties, but nevertheless, that's just an aside. Thank you.
And I have no one else in the queue.
Thank you.
Mr. Spurnack, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to testify in this matter? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, I will close the hearing and the matter rests with the Commission. Mr. Phelps.
So, I'm wrestling papers, excuse me. In the case of 2009-028, an amendment to the UMed Universities and Medical District Framework Master Plan, I move for the changes in the master plan as delineated in the staff memo on pages 4 and 5.
And I have a second from Mr. Isham. Would you care to discuss your motion, Mr. Phelps?
Yes, actually, we've talked about this or discussed this quite a bit already, but in this part of the process, we have to identify findings. What I would find here is that the action we're taking this evening deals not with the approval of a site plan for a road, it deals with the amendment of an existing plan. And the reason plans are being amended is to essentially incorporate features that have gone through each of them a fairly extensive public review and probably agency review process. They had been incorporated inside the official streets and highway plan and probably other documents. There's been planning involved. And so in some respects this evening, what we're doing in terms of making a change in this particular management plan is of a housekeeping nature because the basic policy decisions have been made. That being said, these changes are important because you want to have consistency in your planning documents. And if you don't make these changes, you're going to have the potential for inconsistency in a subsequent development where you want to have consistency in terms of the project with the comprehensive plan. Without the change that we're talking about here, you could have an inconsistency, and that would be difficult to deal with, quite frankly. So I think those are the reasons that I would describe as this being appropriate. The other reasons that I give is that the UMed plan has gone through extensive review over time, that amendments are meant to be processed as necessary over time, that these amendments are appropriate and have gone through review, and that these amendments will, in fact, more effectively implement the management plan that is currently the case now. I support my motion.
Okay. Mr. Isham.
Madam Chair, I'll be supporting this motion also. Now that I got educated on what the fact that we have another crack at the road, because I don't like the design of the road, but we'll deal with that on another day. But I also support the motion.
Thank you. Ms. Pease.
I'll be supporting the motion. I think it's important to add to our findings that the assembly requirements of Ordinance 2003-129 for a traffic study of inter-area circulation has been met through the two to-the-road traffic studies adopted in 2006. Also, the costs were not clearly presented to us. I don't want to represent that we hinged our approval of the changes to show these connections or the development designation for the area north of 40th on road costs or road design. As Mr. Isham hinted, we have not heard the true cost of the project because we don't know what the land cost will be. It's also important to note that the University Community Council supports this amendment, that the Mental Health Trust, which is one of the major property owners who will be affected, supports this amendment, and that, as Ms. Jones noted in previous traffic studies, the community has been very vocal about avoiding impacts of through traffic, business traffic on their residences, and the vacation of Wright Street and Florina Street help to alleviate that concern, and 40th Avenue provides an alternative which will help to channel the traffic.
Okay. Anyone else wish to speak? Seeing no one in the queue, is there any objection to the motion? Hearing and seeing none, that motion is approved. Thank you very much, everyone. Good work. Thank you, Ms. Contreras and Mr. Robinson and Mr. Nelson. Now we're going to just move right along with our agenda. And we'll allow Mr. Lyon a moment to set himself up. Okay, the next item on our agenda is case number 2009-052. The matter before us is AMAT's project ranking, criteria, and nominations. Mr. Lyon, and by the way, we are sitting as the AMAT Citizen Advisory Committee now. We have that hat on rather than planning commissioners. Thank you for coming out this evening to walk us through this process, Mr. Lyon. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for allowing me the chance to speak. My name is Craig Lyon. I'm the AMATS coordinator, and for those folks who don't know what that acronym means, we are the federally mandated body that is tasked with allocating the federal highway transportation dollars that come into the city of Anchorage. And so we have two plans that we generally deal with, the long-range transportation plan, which is the 20-year plan, and the transportation improvement program, which is the 4-year plan. And that transportation improvement program, or TIP, is the one where we have to be fiscally constrained to the penny when we build it. The 20-year plan is more of get a sense of what we might expect in the next 20 years and what we hope to build. What's that? The light is on right here. Okay. A little better? Okay. So tonight what we're talking about is the ranking criteria that we use to rank and score all of the projects that are in the TIP. And I believe you have in your packet the roadway criteria, the transportation enhancement criteria, and I believe you should have the CMAQ criteria as well. And the CMAQ criteria would be those criteria for ranking those projects that deal with congestion mitigation and air quality, and that's the CMAQ and CMAQ. The request that we sent out to you asked you to look at all of those criteria, but especially with an eye towards the roadway and transportation enhancement criteria. As Chair Jones mentioned, you serve as our Citizens Advisory Committee. It's federally mandated that we have a Citizens Advisory Committee, and so that is your status here tonight for us. We do have a separate AMATS Air Quality Advisory Committee that will be looking at those CMAQ criteria, and so while it is in your purview to look at all three of them, we hope that you would concentrate on the roadway and the transportation enhancement ones.
Yes, the Air Quality Advisory Committee, we will be looking at those on the 23rd,
yes,
the CMAQ requirements.
So, other than that, I guess I would be happy to answer any questions you might have on the criteria.
Does anyone have questions? Good.
Oh, can I make one more statement?
Sure.
I believe that you folks received this looking at my email, but Mr. Weddleton did send me his comments on the criteria, and I looked at the CC, and it looked like all the members of the committee received it as well. So I'll be happy to try and answer some of the points that he raised there as well, if you'd like me to at the end of the day.
Okay. Ms. Pease, you're the first in the queue.
Yes, I realize that the focus is, I guess I realized belatedly that the focus is on the ranking system, because I was mesmerized or drawn in by the nomination forms and it occurred to me how much the nomination forms influence the ranking. And so I hope that we can talk about that a little bit. And I guess one question right off the bat is, in looking at the roadway project nomination form, the form jumps right to the description of the project. And what I feel would be far more beneficial is starting with what is the transportation problem or issue, and can you quantify it? Because often there will be several different possibilities. And so, for example, if somebody says they want to extend, I don't know, B Street across Chester Creek with a new bridge, that's nonsensical. But if they jump right to B Street, does that project then get thrown right into the hopper with some validity from the start? Whereas if the problem were further additional connections across Chester Creek to relieve congestion on A Street and C Street, you might come up with a different score. So I guess that's just an example of how if you start with the questions, if you start with questions that tilt you in one direction, you come up with a whole different score than more quantified and specific questions. So is this something we can talk about now, or would these, obviously the project forms have already been sent out for this cycle, so what's the timing on this concern?
Well, through the chair, Ms. Pease, when we rank and score projects, we try to get as much information as we can, so we're trying to rank all of the projects on the same level. Oftentimes we don't have all this information, and that's why previously we didn't really have an in-depth nomination form, so we tried to this was our stab at trying to make something that would get us as much information as possible. Oftentimes we have projects that are nominated by government agencies. They tend to fill them out a little bit more because they often have easier access to a lot of that information. And members of community councils or members of the public may not have all that, so we try to give them the opportunity to give us as much information as they can. We have put the nominations out at the same time as we're ranking and scoring the projects, or putting out the criteria. We are on a relatively short time frame. I mean, we have to have this done by the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of September, but when you look at your calendar and the assembly calendar and all that sort of stuff, where we kind of got truncated in terms of getting all of this together. So in a perfect world, we might have done the criteria out first and the nomination forms, and then we would have put out for nominations, but just in terms of the timing, this is kind of the way we had to do it. But we try to get all that information together and then rank and score them. The criteria themselves, we try to fine-tune them to be as objective as possible. Obviously, things such as quality of life is much more subjective and harder to score, and that's why we try to get a lot of those criterion that tend to be more objective in terms of the daily traffic count and whether it's a collector or an arterial. Those are pretty objective. So we take a little bit of everything and try to get the best possible information before we rank and score.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
Well, yes and no. I spent some time critiquing the project nomination forms, and I just wondered, I guess I'll go ahead and give you that information now. I don't know whether it will be useful at this point, but I think it's something that definitely needs to be here's another example that maybe makes a little more sense. Economic benefits. It asks simply, does the project encourage economic development, neighborhood revitalization, or freight mobility? It doesn't ask about whether there might be any negative economic benefits. And if the Spenard Road project that we sort of heard a little bit about is any consideration, people there thought it might hurt their economic opportunities or take land out of their, some of their lots might be reduced to the point where they couldn't use them. So it's how you ask the question.
Well, let me say this, that Our previous mayor was very fond of saying that all of the easy roads are built, all the easy projects are done. The last time we ranked and scored projects, he directed us through the AMATS committee to rank every single project in the city of Anchorage, regardless of who owned it, whether it was a municipal-owned facility or a state-owned facility. So we ranked, the ranking and scoring was done by a team, and we ranked DOT and PM&E and Transit and all those sort of folks. We ranked 460 some odd projects. It's possible, I'm sure, that somebody could come up with a new project that wasn't on that list, but that's a lot of projects. So I guess what I'm saying is, even if we don't get the information on the nomination form, the people that were ranking and scoring, I think, have a pretty good base of knowledge to draw from for terms of information about the projects. We certainly would know if Spenard Road came up for ranking that there's a significant amount of opposition in certain sectors. So we would have that information even if someone took that nomination form and didn't mention anything about any negative impact. So we take what's on the nomination form, and then we utilize our own knowledge of the city and the facilities and the projects and all that sort of stuff and use it to form the basis for our ranking.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Phelps.
Is this the time that we provide comments, or is this the time to ask questions?
You can do both.
Okay. I'm going to provide comments then, all right? And I'll try and write some of this stuff down as well. I'm just going to go through in sequence. Preserves existing facility. I don't think you want to use the word preserves. The word preserve means keep as is. What you're trying to really do is conserve the system so you don't have to make additional expenditures. So I think the concept is there, but the wording is incorrect, and I suggest you think about a different word that better captures the concept of holding on to the system you have right now. On economic benefits, I say it's encourage economic development and so forth and so on. That's true. I would agree that, in fact, that is a worthy objective. The problem is in terms of the metric. How do you determine what economic advantages, economic development, how do you measure that? And so that's difficult, because if you try and think about, by the way, I used to do this sort of stuff, when you try and figure out how to apply that, it's difficult to know or difficult to identify a metric that you could actually use. So you might want to think about keeping the concept of economic development, but putting in wording in here that's closer to something that's real worldish. An example of what is probably a good way of thinking about it is freight mobility, but there's other concepts than freight mobility. And I'm sure if you think about it for a bit, you can describe those other things. And so those other things are probably better at describing the ability of a transportation project to increase economic development than just thinking about economic development. So I would encourage you to think more specifically about the metric or metrics you're using there. On consistency with adopted plan, my reaction is if it ain't consistent, it ain't going anywhere. Just take the whole thing out because it's assumed it's consistent. If it's not consistent, it shouldn't be under consideration, period. That's simple. 9 is improve roadway connectivity. I don't think you're really talking about just roadway. I think you're talking about system connectivity. And when we think about a transportation project, even if it's a road, we're thinking about pedestrians and bicycles and what have you. And so we do want to think about it more generically in terms of system improvements, not just roadway improvements. The roadway improvements are a means to achieving the system improvements. Functional class and OSHP, I'd strongly recommend you drop this whole thing out, because what happens here, what is happening here, is that what you're doing is, by virtue of using this criteria, you're always going to get a big facility as being more important than a little facility. And in fact, little facilities are actually much more cost effective than big facilities. And so I don't think that you want to have functional class as a ranking criteria because you're weighting it so heavily in terms of an expressway or freeway. So that to me is inappropriate. You should be ranking within a functional class. You're not trying to rank between functional classes. Funding efficiency, 13, it says encourages pursuit. I would think that you wouldn't want to use pursuit, which is an intent, as the way of describing it. I think what you're probably trying to say is increased probability of non-state or non-federal funding. So if there's funding sources out there, they should be used, but you're not after the concept of encourage pursuit. You're trying to identify what realistic funding options actually exist. So you're more driven by the reality of the funding source itself. And that's it.
Okay. Ms. Yoshimura.
Through the chair, I just had one question on item number 4, economic benefits. I was wondering what the thoughts were when it says study or plan as an economic development proposal having economic benefit or substantially improves efficiency of freight mobility along freight corridors. I wondered what your rationale was for putting those two together. I can think of lots of economic development opportunities that have nothing to do with efficiency or freight mobility, and I just don't understand why those two are sort of lumped together.
Okay. Through the chair, this will kind of answer, will give you some sense, both to Mr. Phelps and Ms. Yoshimura's question. We have, as you can see, a number of criteria there. We have 16 criteria. And it's not so much having a criteria that helps, some will help certain types of projects and others won't. But, for example, we have a criteria here for O&M, operations and maintenance, and we also have preserves existing facility. Well, a preserves existing facility is going to really help a project that just needs a pavement rehab. It's not going to help a project that needs a complete reconstruction, because just repaving a road that has a lousy road bed is not going to preserve that existing facility. It might, give you a couple more years out of it, but that's about it. Whereas a project that reduces the O&M cost, that's going to help a complete reconstruction, because if you do that complete reconstruction, you're not going to have to worry about drainage issues on that road. You're not going to have to worry about some kinds of maintenance that you had to do because there was a deteriorating road bed. But that project that completely, or just does the pavement off the top, that's not going to give you a reduction in O&M costs, really, because you're just paving that thing. The road bed is still really good. It's in good shape. It didn't have a lot of O&M costs due to drainage or other things like that. So we try to have criteria that are going to measure different things, and some projects will score well on one and not as well on the other. In terms of the economic and freight development or freight mobility, that highest score is for something that does both increasing some economic development thoughts, or it enhances the efficiency of freight mobility. If you go down you get farther down, it's either or kind of proposition. This is one of those more subjective criteria where it is hard to measure, and who determines if a project necessarily increases economic development? It's again, we get what we can do to get the best people in the room who might have some ideas on it, and try to get a sense of, is this really going to improve economic development? We may not hit it every time, but it's a more subjective criteria, so it is harder to measure. Whether you can measure both of those in the same criteria, or whether they should both be in the same one, that's a good point. I mean, I guess I haven't really thought about it, whether they should both be in the same one or not.
Well, as you know, I have a bias towards residential development, and I just think that this, by the way this is worded, or substantially improves efficiency of freight mobility along freight corridors, that there is a bias here towards commercial. And I think that if you're going to say or, you could theoretically then give a ranking to a project that has improves the efficiency of freight mobility along freight corridors. You could give that theoretically a 15. And it just seems to me that it either needs to have its own category, or instead of an or, it should be an and. And I hate to wordsmith you, but that's my opinion.
This is good information. I'm happy to bring it back to the committees there and pass it along. I definitely will.
Anything further, Ms. Yoshimura?
No, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Pease.
Yes, I'll go through the two that I looked at most, which is starting with roads. First category, reducing congestion. It seemed to me that it's a good idea to score them based on their long-term performance, whether or not they induce traffic, but it didn't seem that that's spelled out. So in the categories A, B, C, and D, I would like to see it more specific. So, for example, significant reduction would be defined as improvement by 2 or 3 levels of service, and that improvement would last 20 years. Because if you're building multiple new lanes, but you're inducing traffic to fill them up, within 5 years you haven't reduced congestion. So then B would be, reducing the level of service, or improving the level of service by 2 or 3 levels and lasting 15 to 20 years or so on. Something to that effect, so that we do ensure that we get a long-term reduction in congestion. As far as safety goes, on item, I guess on all the items, I'm not sure why it says that safety projects should address recent changes to traffic patterns. It seems to me that it creates a bias against long-standing traffic patterns that have created a hazard. And I would like, if there's no explanation as to why recent changes have a priority, then drop those words.
Through the chair, this was a criteria that was specifically, this language was specifically offered by DOT, and I honestly don't know why it says recent changes, but I will find out, and I can get back to you with that. And if the answer doesn't sound good,
Okay.
happy to.
But the point is that we don't want to ignore or down rank long-standing traffic safety issues. If I may continue.
You may.
With economic benefits, I'd have to agree with Ms. Yoshimura that except for the mention of neighborhood revitalization in that shaded prelude to this category, there really isn't any way that neighborhood revitalization can earn any points. The emphasis is on freight mobility. So I would like to see some additional language in these categories that talk about improving circulation within neighborhoods or reducing cut-through traffic. Those are ways that roads can provide economic benefits and revitalize neighborhoods.
Okay. Through the chair, Ms. Pease, this discussion did come up at the Technical Advisory Committee. The discussion was about neighborhood redevelopment or revitalization, and I guess the thought was category or criteria number 15, neighborhood integrity, specifically talks about project promotes or revitalizes neighborhood integrity. I guess my point earlier was to try and say, some projects may score better on one criteria and not as well on another. And this was an attempt to try and, harness some more of the buying power of a project that doesn't have anything to do with economic development or freight or something like that, and is going to help a neighborhood. And so it might get some more points out of it here. And maybe the point value needs to be bumped up or something. But
Right. On 15, the highest point value is 10.
Right. And I will tell you that the criteria has stayed the same for a while now. This particular criteria, number 15, neighborhood integrity, was added at the policy committee level, which is the top level, as they were adopting it. And so it didn't really get a chance to get vetted through the technical and air quality committees and this committee. So it was I mean, I hate to say it, but it was something that was added at the last minute by some politicians. So you can imagine that it might need a little more fine-tuning. So a higher point value would be probably just might help harness that a little bit more.
The higher point value on the neighborhood
Exactly.
integrity. That might work.
At least to come up equal to the one with economic, the economic benefits.
In addition, the economic benefits one in the previous tip had been bumped up to 20 points. The members of the policy committee felt that it was so important, they moved it up to 20 points, and I guess at the technical committee this time around, they thought, it really makes more sense that it's 15, because it may not be as high as the other ones, but maybe bumping up neighborhood integrity as well might equal things out a bit.
Yep. Should I go through?
Yes.
Improving quality of life. It would be, I think, I would like to see that start with the 20-point ranking as well. And here or in another category, I'd like to see some discussion of not causing negative impacts on adjoining property values. Maybe this goes in economic benefits, and improving the land use efficiency in urban areas. Those both, the latter, improving efficient land use, get at a whole lot of issues, including walkability. And if not here, then somewhere we need to avoid some points for implementation of the desired land use plan pattern. On supportive projects, which is number 7, it struck me as perhaps amiss that in the C, D, and E categories, we're still awarding a fair number of points when there's only a slight majority support or there's actually opposition. I would downsize some of those awards so that if you've got 3 of 5 groups supportive, you've got a little bit more than a majority. That would be 6 to 9 points. But if you have less than half, you have 2 of 5 or 1 of 5. It seems to me that would be a 3 and a 0 or a negative, because you have an overwhelming majority of opposition is what you're saying there. So,
good point.
Skipping down to intermodal and multimodal characteristics. I would like to see this go all the way up to 20 points, because this is the direction we're trying to move as a modern, denser urban area. We want people to be able to get off one sort of transportation conveyance, long distance, and then go about their business in a more efficient way, on foot or motor scooter or whatever. So in addition to starting with 20 points, I would also like to see wording in here to the effect of the project has significant potential, or has components with potential to reduce vehicle traffic in the near to mid-term, 5 to 10 years, and have that be about 15 points. If we don't start building those components when we do get commuter rail, we won't have any way to get people around the city once they're here. So I would agree with Mr. Phelps that Category 11, the functional class in the OS, H, and P should be deleted because it just biases the larger projects. In 12, unless my eyesight's not working, there's only one word difference between the two. Okay, I did see one word difference. I thought they was exact same words. So I don't know whether that is, might just look at that. I'm not sure how you would score them differently. And in cost benefit value, category 14, it says highest score if completed design work demonstrates the project is clearly buildable with a comparably low cost. And I'm not sure what you're comparing to. And wondered whether it might be better worded if it's clearly buildable with no unpredictable or unusual costs, something to that effect. Otherwise, you need to compare it to something. Maybe there's a formula that says the average two-lane road costs, whatever, $300,000 per block, and you're comparing it to that. But if not, what I think would be beneficial is to watch out for projects that cross wetlands or that have soil questions or right-of-way is going to be fought for tooth and nail, that sort of thing. And finally, the neighborhood integrity, I would support increasing the amount of points. And I would also put in more specific wording. This is very vague compared to the others. Wording to the effect of makes beneficial connections between neighborhoods and town centers, or between neighborhoods and major community attractions such as parks or middle schools. And then also under negatively impacts neighborhood integrity, I would put in specifically creates pedestrian barriers, creates noise, or high levels of noise, or otherwise affects pedestrian activity and outdoor use of the neighborhood.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll take a break. I have more on trails, but let's
Okay.
get roads.
Mr. Isham.
I'd just sort of like to follow up a little bit on what Mr. Phelps and Ms. Pease indicated on sort of quantifying. You have lots of terms in here like significant, moderate, some, above average, and things of that nature. And it seems to me that if you're going to rate these by a committee or a team, you need to define your terms of what those mean, because what may be significant to me may be moderate to somebody else, and you can maybe use percentages, ranges or something like that. But I do a lot of this stuff on rating proposals and stuff like that, and it helps if you're very specific because you have different experience levels with your team, and you want to try and bring them all together so you get true, accurate evaluations.
Okay. Is that
It for you?
Ms. Yoshimura?
I'm happy once again to agree with Ms. Pease on item number 15, neighborhood integrity, and I would add the word for that heading to say neighborhood integrity and connectivity. And I would support 15 points for that area. And my general comment for this is I think that this may be the only area in this entire proposal that really speaks to residential development. And I think this does need to be expanded and become more specific, as Ms. Pease suggested. I think it's not uncommon when dealing with transportation plans to think of them in terms of commercial economic development, but we have a tremendous issue of our workforce housing driving to the Mat-Su Valley and back and forth every day, 5 or 6 days a week. And I think one of the reasons for that is we don't have adequate transportation plans for residential development. So I would just encourage you, I'm pleased that it's there, and I would just encourage you to look at it seriously and expand it and increase the point system. Thank you.
Through the chair, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the comments, especially on neighborhood integrity, because this is something where you get ranking all these projects and you just get going along, and you look at this one and you say, well, it needs to be fixed, but I can't get my head away from it to try and figure out how to fix it. So these are really good comments. These are really, really helpful. This will help.
clear that one up a bit.
Okay. Mr. Wang.
Well, I don't know how helpful this will be, but I think it's kind of interesting. We were talking about this should get 3 points, and moderate gets 2 points, and dramatic gets 4 points. And what I'm not getting is any sense of the overall mission, which is, have you looked at past rankings and said, my gosh, we're totally ignoring neighborhoods, or we're putting too much focus in industrial areas? I'd like to see a little bit more of a results-driven approach and look at prior rankings and say, where is this ranking failing us, as opposed to quibbling over 2 points for this and 4 points for that? Because I think we're just cutting the toenails on an elephant and not looking at the elephant if, we're just sort of drilling down to this macro level immediately without looking at the broader mission and where maybe we've missed the mark in prior rankings.
Sure. Through the chair, when the staff got together a couple of months ago to talk about these criteria, and because we knew that the last time we used them, we all, and it was 3.5, 4 years ago, we all knew that there were areas that we needed to improve upon, but it was a long time ago. So we refreshed our memory by grabbing a bunch of prior rankings and having them at those meetings and saying, okay, what's wrong with this criteria last time? Because, we ranked Old Seward with a 15 here, and we ranked Old Glen with a 12. Why the difference here? So we did utilize that method of trying to rehash and refresh in our minds how we came to score them last time, and what was the problem last time? Why did we need to change this? How did we know, this isn't getting what we want to get? And I will say also, moderate versus significant versus, it really is, it's really hard at times to try and figure out what the difference is. But again, we get in the room and we have these folks that have ranked and scored stuff for a long time, and we talk it out. And you could get you 6 in a room and rank the same things, and they might come up differently, but we try to use these criteria as objectively as we can so that most people would look at that and say, well, that kind of makes sense. We don't want things that really stand out, like, how did you rank that with such a high score when everyone else seems like it was lower? So we try to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pease, can I ask a question before you take another turn? Okay. I have a question, and this has to do with what may at some point in the future be a potential category that I don't see here. And it has to do with safety issues with regards to institutional uses. And what causes me to think about it has to do with safety issues related to roads around schools, roads around special care facilities for special populations of people, particularly now that we're starting to have so many older people that are living in assisted living homes and such. They're still semi-independent, but they may be out walking or biking and such. And it's not something that maybe would go in this one, but it may be something that we need to look at in the future, is finding out where these facilities are and looking to see if there are some special safety considerations we need to take into account for the roads and the crosswalks, et cetera, near these institutional facilities. But certainly schools, and I'm thinking like around our hospitals and our special care, facilities. And we know where they are because they all have to be licensed. So that's just an idea.
Okay.
And the only other comment that I had is, on all these categories under number 2 for improved safety, were those all pretty much generated by DOT?
Those were, yes. They have a comprehensive this highway safety improvement program, and they have a scoring index that ranks based on the rate of accidents at an intersection and what type of accident. It ranks it out, so it's a hard and fast number.
I'm familiar with it. I just wanted to know if this was primarily their standard criteria. And this follows federal guidelines.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Ms. Pease, thank you for being patient.
Thank you. I was going to address the transportation enhancement, so I wanted to see make sure other people are finished with roads.
I'm done now with roads.
Mr. Ryan, I had a question to start off with, and that is, is there any particular reason why transportation enhancement categories often use a different scale? There are fewer categories in which 20 points can be awarded. And is this a concern? Are these projects ever rated or ranked in competition with the roadway projects?
Through the chair, no, they're not. They're ranked in their separate, they have a separate funding category for them. Our policies and procedures say we're going to spend between 10 and 20% of our total allocation on these projects and only these projects. These transportation enhancement projects in this category are standalone projects. They're not, you're building a road and you're adding a trail next to it because it's part of the construction of the road. That's not in this category. This is standalone Chester Creek Trail or things of that nature.
Okay. In terms of the categories, then, on quality of life, I would like to see an additional points awarded if the project serves as a viable alternative to driving and parking for a major destination or destinations. And with economic benefits, right now 4C awards a 0 if there's no commitment for operation and maintenance. It seemed to me that belonged in the cost benefit category. And I'm glad to see that 4B awards some points if the project may enhance property values. The other change to this one would be perhaps to have points awarded for projects that contribute substantially to circulation in major employment centers or town centers, or to destinations from multiple neighborhoods. Skipping down to number 7, which is consistency with adopted plans. Since our comprehensive plan promotes viable alternatives to vehicle travel, I'd like to see points awarded for that criteria. And I kind of agree with Mr. Phelps. We would assume that projects are consistent with the plans. So I think that the consistency with adopted plan needs to say much more than they're included. It should say whether they're ranked, which it does to some extent, short-term, medium-term priority, but also do they serve specific goals, as I said, such as alternatives to vehicle travel, or goals such as Ms. Jones raised, which is school walking radius. On connectivity, number 11, this sort of, I think it could be more specific, the categories for awarding points. And here again, following the pattern of the land use, the comp plan, I'd like to see points awarded for connectivity to major employment centers, to town centers, or to community centers such as schools from several neighborhoods. And I would agree with, I think it was Mr. Phelps or Mr. Reddleton, that connecting community council areas is big. There's no there in the community council area. We want to look at destinations. And that's all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Isham.
Yes, I just have a question. In regards to these transportation enhancement projects, are there specific funds allocated for these, or do they compete with the roadway funds?
Through the chair, again, we have our set allocation. The policies and procedures of AMAT says 10 to 20% of our funding goes to these type of projects, period.
Okay, so it really doesn't matter if they have the same scoring maximum number of points because they're competing in two different areas.
Right. We don't have
two different
roadway
pots of money.
Through the chair, we don't have roadway projects competing against.
No, two different pots of money.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Okay, anyone else? Ms. Yoshimura.
Well, this is not about the ranking criteria, but I just have to say that, well, I confess that I read Parade magazine when it comes in the Sunday paper.
Me too.
That it had a very good article about how we can save our roads, and it says, build good, not perfect roads. And so I just want to quote that for the public record. Just 6 years ago, only 44% of Missouri's highways were rated in good condition. Money was too tight to do much about it. The state's transportation boss, Pete Ron, decided something had to change. The problem, he believed, was that highway engineers invariably tried to build the best roads possible. But what if Missourians didn't always need the best road possible? What if they were willing to settle for good enough? His answer was a new road building doctrine he called practical design. Today, when Missouri engineers design highways, they aim not to build perfect projects, but to build good projects that give you a good system, says Ron. Practical design says to start at the bottom of the standard and go up to meet the need. When you meet the need, you stop. And I just thought, in very simple language, that was a good philosophy with dollars being tight, that it's something for Anchorage to consider.
Especially since we go back and dig them up every few years and redo them. So I concur. That kind of makes sense. Any comments, Mr. Lyon?
Through the chair, Mr. Yoshimura, that was one of the aha moments for me. It was, I read the same article today, brought into work and read it, and I thought, hey, why can't we do this? I mean, I can only imagine the pushback from the engineers, but that doesn't mean they get to win. I mean, this was, I'm going to be researching that tomorrow. I thought that was really,
right, and just,
wow.
What exactly do we need to do so we have safe roads that are traversable and will get the job done? What a concept. Anyone else? Mr. Isham?
Just one more comment back to what Ms. Pease said originally on these nomination forms. I really think that the very first thing that ought to appear at the top of the page of every one of them is what is the problem that we're trying to solve before we go into what the project is. If we'd maybe asked that question for the Knickarm Bridge, it may not have even gotten to where it got, because I don't think there was a problem they were trying to solve.
And it also might stop some of the requests, just the I wish lists. It would sure be nice to have a road here or a road there. And perhaps we maybe would just get requests for problems. Can't believe it. Ms. Pease.
Yes, I think I raised it before, but on the same topic, when someone's raising a problem, to the extent possible, the form should ask them to quantify it.
Thank you.
I trust that you're incorporating Mr. Weddleton's comments into this.
Yes. I have.
Any further comments, my friends? It would be probably nice if our Citizens Advisory Committee could have a motion adopting all of our comments to officially send them forward to the Technical Advisory Committee? Yes, I guess it is a public hearing, so I'd better open it. Well, the public hearing is open. Is there anyone that would like to testify? Seeing and hearing no one, the hearing is closed. A motion would be in order. Now that we've already had our discussion, Mr. Phelps?
I would move that the Planning and Zoning Commission, for the recommendations that have been stated by each of the individual commissioners to AMATS as an expression of the Planning Commission as a citizen advisory committee, but I think more importantly as an expression of the body that deals with land use development and land use controls on a continuing basis. We do provide or do perform two hats. We are the Citizen Advisory Committee, but quite frankly, I think more importantly, we're the Planning Commission for the community. And so I would hope that as we make this motion, it would be understood by the administration that, at least I believe, that these comments should be given a very strong consideration.
And Mr. Wang seconded the motion. Thank you, Mr. Phelps, for discussing your motion. Is there any further discussion? I don't see anyone in the queue. I will add just a couple of comments. First of all, I want to once again thank Mr. Lyon for bringing this forward to us. It's very important that the Planning Commission, sitting as a Citizen Advisory Committee, continue to have input on all matters that are amending AMAT's documents or any modifications to anything, and we will always make time for you to come and be on one of our agendas. We're a really friendly group, and we'll definitely make time for you. And we very much appreciate you on short notice pulling the materials together for us. And we welcome the opportunity to have input. Ms. Pease?
Yes, I just wanted to say that given that we gave most of our comments verbally and didn't flesh them out in great detail in some cases, I would be willing as a member of the AMAT subcommittee, if you do come up with a draft and want further feedback on what we proposed here, I'd be happy to give that feedback. And maybe the other AMAT subcommittee members would too.
Through the chair, I'd be happy to do that. These comments have been very, very helpful. So
Okay.
I'll get them together as soon as I can. I have to do it before Wednesday because I'm leaving Thursday. But I'll get them together fast, get them back to you, and any comments I get back would be great.
Thank you. Yes, why don't you go ahead and just email them out to the entire commission. Mr. Isham, are you?
Madam Chair, we may also want to bounce them against the Secretary's minutes, too, to make sure everything was caught.
We'll be to him before Wednesday. So he's on his own.
He's on his own. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Lyon and Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. I took good notes.
All right. Motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Okay. Is there any objection? Hearing none, we're adjourned.